It wasn't the violence that made federal agents panic, it was the paperwork. When four brothers from Arkansas arrived in Detroit during the 1980s, they didn't build a neighborhood crew, they built a business. BJ, Larry, Willie, and Otis Chambers created an operation so organized that workers had assigned shifts, managers tracked inventory, and every dollar was carefully recorded. Instead of depending on chaos, the Chambers brothers relied on structure. Processing houses supplied neighborhood distribution spots, while trusted employees handled transportation, accounting, and security. Their operation expanded across Detroit, generating enormous daily profits during the height of the crack epidemic. Their weakness. Federal investigators spent years documenting the enterprise, tracing financial records, surveillance, informants, and employee testimony. In 1988, a sweeping federal indictment targeted the leadership, accusing them of operating one of Detroit's most sophisticated drug organizations. The empire that looked more like a corporation than a street crew collapsed under the weight of its own records. But investigators would later discover there was one decision the Chambers brothers made that, what started as a biker gathering in 1977, tensions between the Hells Angels throughout the Midwest. Both organizations were expanding, recruiting, and fighting for influence over territory, clubs, and criminal opportunities across the Great Lakes region. One of the most infamous confrontations occurred near Clarkston, Michigan, where members and associates from both clubs reportedly came face-to-face in a violent clash. Accounts vary on the exact details, but the confrontation became legendary in biker history because of what followed. After the dust settled, an unofficial territorial understanding emerged. Michigan would largely become a stronghold for the Hells Angels, while the Outlaws maintained dominance in other portions of the Midwest. The conflict helped solidify boundaries that reduced direct large-scale warfare between the two organizations, though tensions never completely disappeared. Nearly 50 years later, the event is still referenced as a pivotal moment in the history of North American biker wars. Was the territorial divide that followed a sign of criminal organizations acting rationally to avoid further bloodshed? Or did it simply allow both groups to become stronger? Before BMF, before the Chambers brothers, before the federal government even understood what was happening in Detroit, there was Young Boys Incorporated. They didn't look like the mafia. That was the scary part. Most of them were teenagers. In the late 1970s, Detroit police started noticing something strange on the west side. Young guys, 15, 16, 17 years old, were suddenly wearing designer clothes, driving luxury cars, and carrying themselves like corporate executives. But investigators say behind that flashy image was one of the most disciplined heroin organizations America had ever seen. They called themselves Young Boys Incorporated, YBI. According to investigators, YBI allegedly built a system that changed street crime forever. Instead of older men standing on corners, they used juveniles because the penalties were lighter. If one got arrested, another replaced him immediately. Authorities later claimed the organization operated almost like a fast food franchise. Strict rules, assigned territories, money quotas, and violence for anybody who broke protocol. And the money? Allegedly millions. But what made Detroit terrified wasn't just the drugs, it was the rumors. Bodies turning up over missing cash, teenagers carrying military-grade weapons, crews expanding into cities hundreds of miles away, and whispers that the leaders were becoming richer than legitimate businessmen. By the early 1980s, Detroit wasn't just fighting a gang anymore. It was fighting an empire. Question: do you think YBI created the blueprint for modern street organizations in America?
In the 1980s, Detroit wasn't just a motor city, it was a war zone. And at the center of the smoke was a crew so lethal, even the cartels gave them space. They were called the Best Friends. But in this city, friendship was a death sentence. Led by the four Brown brothers, Reggie, Booby, Gregory, and Ezra, they didn't start as kingpins. They started as muscle. They were the hit squad for the city's biggest drug lords, including the legendary Rick Wershey Jr., aka White Boy Rick. Their specialty? Precision. They didn't just pull triggers. They operated like a military unit. If you owed money or crossed a line, the friends were the last faces you'd ever see. But here's the thing about hitters. They eventually stopped taking orders. The best friends realized they didn't need to work for the bosses when they could be the bosses. They turned on their employers. They turned on their rivals. They even turned on the city itself. They began a systematic takeover of the Detroit underworld, leaving a trail of over 80 bodies in their wake. They weren't just dealers anymore. They were a death squad. The fear was so deep that nobody would talk. But when you're that loud, the feds eventually hear you. By the early 90s, the RICO Act caught up. Internal paranoia, snitching, and a massive FBI crackdown finally dismantled the crew. Today, the names of the Brown brothers are whispered as a dark legend in Detroit's history, a reminder of an era where the lines between loyalty and betrayal were written in lead. They called themselves best friends.
The world knows him as White Boy Rick, the teen kingpin of 1980s Detroit. But the FBI's own payroll records tell a story the government tried to bury for 30 years. Richard Wershe Jr. wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was asset number 122, a 14-year-old child soldier recruited by federal agents to do a job grown men were too afraid to touch. While his peers were in 9th grade, Wershe was being handed thousands of dollars in operating expenses to buy kilos and infiltrate the Curry brothers, a crew with direct ties to Detroit Mayor Coleman Young's inner circle. This wasn't a standard undercover op. It was a state-sponsored hit on the city's political elite, using a minor as the ultimate wire. The feds didn't just watch him. They coached him on how to look, talk, and move high-level weight to gain the trust of Johnny Lil Man Curry. But in 1987, once the politicians were indicted and the Curry empire fell, the FBI didn't put their asset in witness protection. They abandoned him. At 17, Wershe was caught with 8 kilos of cocaine, and despite his years of service, the government remained silent as he was sentenced to life without parole. For 32 years, he was the longest-serving nonviolent juvenile offender the government built, used, of BMF. But here's the part nobody tells you. She wasn't running the empire. Tanessa Welch came out of Detroit and moved in the same circles as the Black Mafia family, one of the most powerful drug organizations in the country. While Big Meech and Southwest T built a multi-state operation moving cocaine and millions in cash, Welch was close enough to the inner circle to live the lifestyle and eventually get caught up in it. She was federally convicted and served time for her role in drug trafficking tied to that network. Not a boss, not a founder, but not innocent either. And that's where the story gets real. Because today, she's telling her story as a survivor, not a participant, and media has helped turn her into something bigger than the paperwork ever showed. So the question is, was she a key player behind the scenes, or just close enough to power to get pulled in? If you want the real stories behind BMF and federal cases, follow now.
I send prayers in a trap.
Detroit, late 1970s, factories closing, streets changing, and a group of teenagers just rewrote the drug game in America. They called themselves Young Boys Incorporated. Started by a group of neighborhood friends still in their teens, YBI wasn't just another street crew. It was one of the first black drug organizations to run like a corporation. Branding, expansion, franchises, violence. Their blueprint was simple and ruthless. They used kids as heroin couriers. If police caught them, they faced lighter juvenile charges, while the real bosses stayed protected behind the scenes. By the early 80s, YBI controlled up to 80% of Detroit's heroin trade and expanded into cities like Boston, bringing in tens of thousands a day, but power brought paranoia. Internal wars started. Bosses turned on each other. One founder was assassinated in broad daylight. Soon after, federal indictments hit, and dozens of members went down. Even after the fall, their blueprint didn't die. Many major drug organizations that came later copied the YBI structure, turning street crews into full-scale criminal enterprises. Young, organized, ruthless, YB. I wasn't just a gang, they were a system, and the streets still run on that blueprint today.
When people talk about Detroit street gangs, the focus usually stays on black organizations. But for decades, the Latin Counts quietly built influence in neighborhoods many outsiders ignored. The Latin Counts arrived in Detroit as part of a larger Midwest expansion, rooted in Chicago gang culture, but adapted to Detroit's unique street and prison environment. What began as neighborhood-based protection evolved into an organized street gang with rules, hierarchy, and territory. Unlike cities with large Latino populations, Detroit's Latin Counts operated as a minority force. That meant survival depended on structure, discipline, and strategic alliances. Members emphasized unity, loyalty, and enforcement. Mistakes weren't tolerated because weakness invited elimination. Territory mattered. Certain blocks, housing areas, and neighborhoods became known count zones. Drug distribution, street enforcement, and reputation were tightly controlled. Violence wasn't random. It was used to send messages and maintain boundaries. Enemies came from multiple directions. Rival Latino crews, independent Detroit street gangs, and prison-based conflicts all shaped the Counts' reality. Inside Michigan prisons, racial politics forced difficult decisions about alignment and survival. Law enforcement attention intensified in the 2000s as federal investigations targeted racketeering, drug trafficking, and violent conspiracies tied to the Latin Counts. Indictments didn't just hit individuals, they aimed to dismantle the organization itself. Detroit's Latin Counts weren't flashy, they were disciplined, and that made them dangerous. For the full documentary breakdown of the Detroit Latin Counts, their origins, and their downfall, subscribe to OC Street Files on YouTube and catch the complete episode there.
Most people know Big Meech. Fewer people understand the man who helped build the machine alongside him. Terry Lee Flannery, known as Southwest T, wasn't the loud face of BMF, but he was a critical part of its foundation. Along with his brother Demetrius Big Meech Flannery, Southwest T helped transform a small Detroit drug operation into a national distribution network that stretched across multiple states by the 1990s. While Meech handled much of the flash branding and public presence, Southwest T was known for a quieter, more reserved role. He focused heavily on operations, logistics, and maintaining stability inside the organization. That balance helped BMF grow rapidly without collapsing under its own weight, at least for a while. Federal investigators later described BMF as one of the most sophisticated drug trafficking organizations in U.S. history. Wiretaps, informants, and long-term surveillance eventually exposed the inner workings of the group, leading to major indictments in the mid-2000s. Both brothers were sentenced to lengthy federal prison terms, effectively ending the organization's reign. What makes Southwest T's story especially notable is what happened later. Unlike many figures tied to major drug empires, he quietly stepped away from the spotlight after his release, focusing on family, health, and distance from the life that once defined him. This isn't just a story about crime. It's about structure, loyalty, and how different personalities can shape the same empire in very different ways. For the full breakdown of Southwest T and the rise and fall of BMF, subscribe to OC Street Files on YouTube and catch the complete episode there. The Eastside Cheddar Boys are one of Detroit's most well-known street crews, rising out of the city's east side in the early 2000s. They weren't just a gang, they were a mix of hustlers, neighborhood cliques, and young rappers whose music and street rep pushed their name across the whole city. The Cheddar Boys became widely known through underground Detroit rap, especially when their name clashed with the West Side's Cheddar Boys connected to Blade Icewood. That East versus West tension became one of Detroit's most infamous beefs, with multiple shootings, ambushes, and retaliation spreading through the city. Law enforcement later tied several violent incidents to the fallout from that rivalry. Beyond the music, the Eastside Cheddar Boys were linked to drug operations, firearm cases, and large-scale fraud schemes, including credit card and identity scams that Detroit crews became known for in the 2000s and 2010s. Even after federal pressure and internal losses, the Cheddar Boys' name still carries weight in Detroit, and their influence helped shape the city's early street rap era, blending hustle, neighborhood identity, and a reputation that spread far beyond the East Side. Follow for more. In Memphis, some crews move loud.
This is OC Street Files, and today we're in Memphis, one of the most important drug hubs in the entire South. Memphis sits right where I-40 and I-55 collide, two of the biggest drug highways in America. If dope was moving from Texas, New Orleans, Atlanta, St. Louis, it passed through Memphis. Whoever controlled those routes became kingpins. In the late 80s and 90s, the Dixie Holmes crews in North Memphis turned whole blocks into open-air drug markets. South Memphis and Castalia Heights had their own organizations. Structured, disciplined, and run like businesses with lookouts, stash spots, and transport crews. Then came the heavy hitters. Crews tied into Texas pipelines, Mississippi couriers, and even early cartel connections. The feds cracked the Rodney Lamont Moore organization, accusing him of moving hundreds of kilos across Tennessee and North Mississippi. By the 2000s, federal task forces swarmed the city, indicting kingpins and dismantling multi-state operations. But the legacy remains. Memphis wasn't just a city, it was distribution power, and the streets knew it. This is OC Street Files. Follow for more.
Young Mob didn't start as a big-time organization. They came straight out of North Memphis, built by young dudes trying to survive the streets they grew up in. Back in the mid-2000s, Memphis started shifting from big-name gangs to cliques and neighborhood crews. People weren't joining national sets. They were building their own identity on their own block. Young Mob did exactly that. Their name grew because the younger members pushed it hard, making noise in the streets and creating a rep that spread past their neighborhood. They weren't organized like a cartel. They were organized like a family. Tight loyalty, shared struggle, and a ride for the block mentality. That's how Young Mob became one of Memphis's most recognizable names. What have you heard about the Young Mob of North Memphis? Who else should we cover in Memphis 10? Leave a comment and follow for more. Memphis has been a federal target for decades because it's not just a street city, it's a distribution city. The geography matters. Memphis sits on major highway corridors and logistics lanes that make it attractive for drug trafficking organizations that move product across state lines. And when you look at the public record, the story of Memphis kingpins is less about one mythical boss and more about overlapping enterprises, street gang structures, prison-linked leadership, and multi-state trafficking conspiracies that federal prosecutors keep naming, dismantling, and redismantling as they reform. One of the clearest organized power examples in the record is the federal government's long-running use of RICO against high-ranking gang leadership tied to Memphis and West Tennessee. In May 2017, federal prosecutors announced a guilty plea by Derek Kennedy Crumpton, identified in the release as an assistant governor for the Gangster Disciples in Tennessee, pleading guilty to RICO conspiracy and drug conspiracy charges in the Western District of Tennessee. That matters because it shows the government wasn't treating the activity as random street crime. It was treating it as enterprise-level coordination. Then in March 2020, ATF reported that DeMarcus Dion Crawford, also known as Trip, described as the chief enforcer for the state of Tennessee, was sentenced to 300 months, 25 years, for conspiracy to participate in a racketeering enterprise. These aren't internet names. These are names in federal releases tied to Memphis area RICO enforcement. Department of Justice ATF. At the same time, Memphis has repeatedly been hit with drug and money networks that the government describes as trafficking organizations and conspiracy cells. In October 2019, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of Tennessee announced that 34 individuals were sentenced after a 2-year OCDETF investigation called Operation Gangster's Paradise, tied to federal drug and money laundering violations. That's the kind of case that usually includes wiretaps, coordinated surveillance, and financial tracing, because you don't sentence 34 people out of one investigation by guessing. You get it with structure, suppliers, transport, stash locations, laundering steps, and the people who keep money moving. Department of Justice. Then you've got cases where the government explicitly links street identity to a business-facing brand or cultural wrapper. In February 2018, local Memphis reporting described federal indictments tied to a drug trafficking organization associated with Major Stacks Entertainment. And the reporting noted connections to members GOC associates from different traditional street groups, including references to Young Mob in coverage. That's an important Memphis-specific pattern. Sometimes the Music Talks Entertainment label becomes part of the public-facing ecosystem around a crew, whether it's a real business, a name used for image, or simply a banner people gather under. The point for the audience is, Memphis street power often has a culture layer, and federal cases sometimes name the umbrella right in the indictment cycle. Local Memphis +1 fast forward into the most current record. In July 2025, DOJ's Office of Public Affairs announced 8 Young Mob gang members indicted in Memphis on racketeering, murder, robbery, firearm, and drug charges. That one sentence alone tells you how the government is framing the operation. Not just narcotics, but a racketeering enterprise with violence, weapons, and organized coordination. It also confirms what locals already know. Memphis isn't just drug dealing. It's the collision of crew politics, plus retaliation cycles, plus money. Department of Justice. And then in December 2025, fresh present tense, federal prosecutors announced 15 alleged members of a drug trafficking organization indicted, describing a conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute large quantities of marijuana and a conspiracy to commit additional offenses. The release lists defendants and locations, including Myron Armstrong, BG, 49, Memphis, Carlos Atkins, Papa Smurf, Low, 52, Memphis, Willie Love, Junebug, 51, Memphis, Princeton Moore, Twin, 44, Memphis, along with others tied to places like Millington, Tennessee, and out-of-state locations including Oklahoma, Texas, and California, which is exactly what you'd expect in a pipeline case. In other words, Memphis as a hub, multiple states as the route, a group large enough that indicting it becomes a press event. Department of Justice +1. Now here's the kingpin truth that your subscribers will respect. The feds rarely call someone a kingpin in press releases the way the internet does. What they do is show you role, rank, and reach through charging decisions. RICO conspiracy for enterprise leadership, drug conspiracy for distribution networks, money laundering for the finance layer, and multi-defendant indictments that show a group has enough structure to prosecute as a unit. That's why your breakdowns need to anchor on what's documented: names, dates, charges, and jurisdictions, not folklore. And the music ties? Here's the clean, accurate way to frame it without making up affiliations. Memphis rap has always been intertwined with real neighborhood reputations, and federal cases sometimes reference entertainment banners or use communications, imagery, and public content to map associations and timelines. In the record, we do have Major Stacks Entertainment itself becomes part of the case narrative and reporting around the indictments. The move is to treat Music Docs culture as a context layer. Who references what neighborhoods get named, what imagery gets repeated, while keeping the claims limited to what's publicly sourced and clearly stated. Local Memphis +1 bottom line. Memphis drug lords exposed isn't one story. It's a pattern of federal dismantling over time. RICO leadership pleas and sentences tied to gang hierarchy in West Tennessee, multi-defendant OCDETF operations like Operation Gangster's Paradise, enterprise indictments tied to crews like Young Mob, and fresh 2025 trafficking indictments naming Memphis defendants and an interstate footprint. If you want the real Memphis case file, it lives in those indictments, those guilty pleas, and those sentences, because that's where the names, dates, and consequences are written in ink.
Most people don't know this about Memphis, Everyone heard about the drug kingpin, but what didn't make the headlines was how deep the operation really went. This wasn't just street dealing. It involved money movement, protection, and a network that stretched beyond the city limits. The short breakdown is already up in the OC Street Files playlist, Street Gangs and Hoods, but the full breakdown is coming soon. We'll talk major players and heavyweighters, music industry movers and shakers, indictments and biggest busts. Subscribe to see the breakdown live. What city or crew should we cover next? Little Rock, Jackson, or Nashville? Drop it in the comments and follow for more.
In Memphis, some crews move loud, others move quiet. King Gate Mafia, often called KGM, is one of those names that stays mostly in street conversations, not headlines. Tied to areas near Kingsgate and surrounding apartment complexes, King Gate Mafia is described by locals as a territorial neighborhood-based crew, made up mostly of younger members pulled in early. Former residents and old police reports mention intimidation tactics, forced affiliations, and disputes that turned deadly inside apartment courtyards and parking lots. Unlike nationally known gangs, KGM never became a brand. No flashy rappers, no viral notoriety, just block politics, internal beefs, and survival-driven loyalty. In Memphis, where dozens of small crews coexist, King Gate Mafia operated more like a pressure point than an empire. Short bursts of violence, long memories, quiet retaliation. And when the city moved on, the scars stayed on the concrete. This is one of those Memphis stories that doesn't trend, but the people who live there never forget. Follow for more. Memphis, Tennessee. This wasn't a street beef. This was an internal execution. Two Vice Lords gang members were just convicted in federal court for murdering their own fellow member. Not over territory, not over money, over suspected betrayal. Prosecutors say the victim was believed to have violated gang rules, and inside certain organizations, that can be a death sentence. During the week-long trial, the feds argued this wasn't random violence. They told the jury the killing was meant to protect the gang's reputation and send a message: loyalty or death. The jury agreed. Both men were found guilty of racketeering murder, meaning the killing was tied directly to gang activity and the criminal enterprise itself. That charge hits different, because in federal court, racketeering murder can mean life in prison, no parole. This case shows something people don't talk about enough. Sometimes the most dangerous threat isn't rival gangs, it's internal discipline inside your own organization. Federal prosecutors say this conviction closes one of the most serious internal retaliation killings tied to Vice Lords' activity in Memphis. But the bigger question is, when loyalty is enforced by fear, how long before everyone becomes a target? Nashville had a kingpin, and the feds spent years building a case before they touched him. During the 1990s, federal investigators say Paul Woods was one of the biggest suppliers moving through Nashville, Tennessee. This wasn't street dealing. Prosecutors said Woods allegedly ran a wholesale pipeline, moving multi-kilogram shipments into the city and distributing them through a network of trusted lieutenants. The feds didn't rush the arrest. They built the case slowly. Wiretaps, undercover buys, surveillance, and eventually, insiders started talking. Former associates flipped and told investigators Woods was at the top, coordinating shipments, money, and distribution across the city. Every time a courier got caught with kilos, every time drugs were seized, prosecutors tied it back to the same network. Instead of charging just drug sales, the feds used conspiracy laws. That meant if they proved he ran the organization, he was responsible for everything the group moved. When the case finally went to trial, the evidence stacked up. Paul Woods was convicted in federal court and sentenced to life in prison, becoming one of the most well-known federal drug cases in Nashville history. Was this justice, or just another example of how conspiracy laws can bury one man for an entire organization?
In offshore accounts, it was hiding it on car lots across Memphis. Federal prosecutors say Wayne David McAlpin Jr. and other used car dealers became key pieces in a massive money laundering operation. The scheme was simple but effective. Investigators say fake buyer information, Fabricated purchase profiles and fraudulent paperwork were used to make dirty cash appear legitimate. On paper, the transactions looked like normal vehicle sales. Behind the scenes, authorities claimed the money originated from large-scale drug trafficking. As the DEA and federal prosecutors tightened their grip on the Petty's organization, the financial network surrounding it began to collapse. The investigation eventually exposed how businesses that appeared legitimate could allegedly become tools for moving criminal proceeds. McAlpin and others ultimately entered guilty pleas as federal agents unraveled the money trail. But investigators say the car dealerships were only one piece of a much larger empire, and the next discovery would lead directly to the cartel's inner circle. And that's when federal agents realized they weren't